willingly accepting of a woman such as Gomti Devi, right? So to some extent, yes. So we see from this that paragraph that it highlights the status of women in a very traditional, in a very patriarchal society, right? That you become a source of ridicule for the people. You become a source of probably desire and lust for other men, and at the same time, you become a source of scorn and rebuttal for traditional men like the narrator. So you see, all in all, she is a victim of such a very patriarchal, sexist society. So the fact that she finds someone like Gangu who's accepting of her is in itself quite radical and unconventional. So this story, at its core, it has the theme of love and marriage, right? And what is so very beautiful about the story is that it's a very unconventional love story. You have two very unlikely people who meet to carry out a journey together, right? So that itself is quite revolutionary for a 1920s writer to write down. So yes, so what do you mean hasn't she left three men? So you see how the narrator in fact is very stuck in his ways. He only recognizes Gomti Devi through her past. There is nothing beyond her past, there isn't a present, and definitely there isn't a future for her. Her past pretty much defines everything there is to Gomti Devi. And this is not just the narrator, this is, of course, he is only echoing the various opinions that the society has laid down, right? But you see how beautifully Gangu challenges this when he says, although no woman can stay where there is no love. A woman doesn't need just food and clothing, she needs love too. So this is, I wouldn't say it's just a radical thought just for 1920s. Even today, a very healthy relationship, positive relationship, ideally should change you or transform you to be a better human being. It should teach you and encourage you to seek out the best version of yourself, right? So essentially, it focuses on the transformative power of love itself. And I don't mean just romantic relationships, but any form of a relationship that you share, may that be with your friends or your parents or your siblings. Essentially, any healthy relationship should encourage the person to reach their best potential, be a better version of themselves, right? Again, this is a very radical thought because even today, usually romantic love is in the language of ownership, and there is a very perverse sense of control that we try to disguise with the language of possessiveness. But generally, even today, in how we recognize love is in these false sense of ownership and control, and these very problematic notions in fact. But here Gangu rejects all of this, negates all of this, and he says love in fact is about letting go of your ego. It is letting go of yourself completely, right? Because at the end of the day, if it is a love that is pure, if it is one that needs to be celebrated, it needs to be a self where both of you manage to let go of your egos, both of you manage to let go of your flaws, and you're accepting of each other, right? And that is, and again, to also look at how he says a woman needs love more than anything else. She deserves love. So again, to say that 1920s, this is a very crucial point because at that point, if a woman was married off, her life is set. She has a husband to take care of her. She has food on her table. She has a roof over her head. It's done. But love was almost an unimaginable, thing that you would attain from a marriage. But here he says, in fact, the most important thing is love. So as in to also say that while she's in your life, she also deserves dignity, respect, right? Again, a very important point where he humanizes Gomti, and especially a female character in the 1920s, where he says she is also deserving of the same amount of respect and dignity that you lay out to any man in society, right? So you see how constantly Gangu is the one. So far, we only know him as an ill-tempered man, somebody who is illiterate. But you see how, in fact, he surprises all of the readers with a very progressive, open-minded thought that he has, right? But again, of course, the narrator is unwilling to accept this man's way of thinking, and he says, I am not a prisoner of worn-out customs and orthodoxies, but to keep in my employment a man who is marrying a slut was really a risky proposition. So you see how constantly the narrator is in disbelief. He refuses to understand or accept the fact that this could be some form of a challenge in society that Gangu is posing, right? So here from this line itself, I think when he says, "I'm not a prisoner of worn-out customs," it's very ironic, and of course, I think Premchand is, it's in a very sarcastic tone because while he believes him to be a very open-minded man, he it follows with calling her a slut. So we see how education does not equal to progressiveness or open-minded, right? And I think all of you can agree to that. Just because you've managed to read this many books or managed to learn about various countries, education does not necessarily mean that you will be a good human being, that you will be somebody who is accepting of change, accepting of differences, overlooking people's vices and flaws, and accepting for who they are. And I think that deserves a far more character, something that is quite difficult to attain, and no education can promise you that, right? So we see how in fact the narrator, who we believe to be somebody who is well read, is in fact quite regressive in his thought, somebody who is far more religiously strict in his code than somebody like Gangu, right? So of course Gangu leaves the job, and we see how the 5 months that goes by, constantly the narrator is waiting for a single moment, for a moment where he'll be proven right. So you see, he is a very egotistical man because he believes in his, very strict system, and he does not want to be proven wrong, right? But constantly he is proven wrong because we see how Gangu, there's this one point where he says, "On his face there was a look of self-assurance and joy that comes only to a contented soul." So this is quite beautiful because if you remember the way that Gangu was introduced in the beginning of the plot, he was an ill-tempered man, somebody who didn't have any friends. But as the story progresses, you see him as somebody who is, happy, contented, quite, um, somebody that has transformed immensely, somebody that sees life as a joy. So again, this is to show the theme of love and how it can really transform people. But of course, this is very, this is of course to the narrator's um, point of view, this is quite irksome and irritating because he does not want Gangu to, be following his path and be proven wrong. So now we of course understand that after 5 months or 6 months or so, that Gomti Devi has deserted Gangu. So she has run away, we don't know where, and nor does Gangu. And we see how the narrator derives a very strange sense of pleasure from it, right? So we see he's quite sadistic, in fact, a very narcissist, somebody that does not mind being proven right despite somebody else's misery, right? Oftentimes we of course want to say "I told you so" usually to our friend or somebody when we are proven right, but we usually refrain from doing that because the other person is in a very terrible, difficult situation. But you see how that does not hinder the narrator whatsoever. In fact, he is gloating with happiness that he was proven right, right? So of course, the narrator again refuses to believe that this woman left on her own accord. He believes that probably she left with a lot of money, or she left for another man. But constantly, what is surprising again is that Gangu refuses to hold on to these very patriarchal notions, which again is blaming the woman right after such a breakup of sort, right? Instead, he says, probably I have done something wrong. Probably I was not enough for her. Again, you constantly see how this he is a very revolutionary character, in fact, where he in fact gives out an equal amount of respect and dignity to women, this woman, right? And again, what is very important is that if you see constantly, he says with the kind of language or the kind of way he presents Gomti Devi, what is so important is, again, usually during 1920s India, not just, or even Bollywood, if you take in the 60s, a woman like Gomti Devi is usually the victim of such a society, right? So if she is accepted by a man, oftentimes that man is seen as a martyr, somebody who should be celebrated, and she is, something that he overlooks in order to, carry out the very morals of society, right? But here you see that he did not accept Gomti Devi because she was a widow or that she left two of her husbands, and he is not a martyr figure. In fact, he is genuinely in love with this woman. And from the way that Gangu speaks, it's almost as though he is more in love with Gomti Devi than she is, right? So we see that he is somebody that is deeply affectionate towards this woman. Right, so throughout he refuses to accept any of the narrator's very sexist remarks. Like he says, probably she left you for another man, or that she took your money and left. So constantly he debunks all of these arguments, and he's again very miserable, somebody that has lost a very dear person to him, right? So of course a few days go by, and then Gangu returns to the narrator. And this time he has a very interesting visitor along with him, and that is the titular character, that is the child. So this child, we learn, was the reason why Gomti Devi had left. So of course, once the narrator comes with this child to the, the Gangu comes with this child to the narrator and Gangu have a brief conversation, and from that the narrator understands that this child is definitely not Gangu's, right? Because this child was born only 6 months after the marriage. So definitely not Gangu's child. And so he constantly tries to ridicule or, persuade this man to understand that, this is not your child. So, and that is when Gangu realizes, oh, this is what the narrator is trying to tell. And this is where the story really turns, and we understand the kind of deep, courageous character that Gangu possesses. Because Gangu, of course, he is an illiterate man, but at the same time, he is not an illogical man. He is again not somebody that does not understand how nature works. Right? So he immediately says, oh yes, I know that. But he says, why mine, Babuji? He's yours, God's. So from this, we understand that he knew from the very beginning that this child is not his. But the fact that he refuses to even address this issue shows what or how brave Gangu is and the kind of love that he truly has for Gomti Devi. Right? And again, when he says, why mine, Babuji? He's yours or God's. He sees this child as a miracle. He sees it as something that will enable their relationship to grow. Right? And again, when he says this statement, he again is somebody that overlooks or negates these very patriarchal values and codes of ownership over the child. Right? To him, this is Gomti Devi's child and thus his child. To him, this is a child that is his child because he will raise this child as his own. Right? He will give it the same amount of love, care, and protection that he would give to his biological child, and thus making this child his own. Right? And I'm sure, I think even today, this statement will be very radical, very revolutionary, right? Because it is quite rare for a man to accept a child that is not his own. Oftentimes, women are always, they, come under scorn and remarks or any form of ridicule, because the best way to ridicule a woman is to, of course, or a child is to question who their father is, right? So even today, that is the kind of language we use. Right, and that is why it is so very important, this lesson, because in the 1920s you had a man that first refused to address this issue, and second, when he affirms the fact that this is my child, right? So from then on, we understand that this child will be Gangu, and there isn't any form of a change that will come to this man. So we see how no form of patriarchal codes of ownership or paternity, right? None of that really mattered to Gangu. So we see how an exemplary man this person is, right? In fact, a very feminist icon in the 1920s itself, somebody that refuses to adhere to such archaic codes.